The moment my phone buzzed during Robert's funeral service, right as the pastor was saying those final words about dust to dust, I knew something was terribly wrong. Not just the inappropriate timing of someone texting during such a sacred moment, but the feeling that crawled up my spine when I glanced down at the screen. He's not in the coffin. 4 words that made no sense. 4 words that changed everything I thought I knew about my husband's death, about my children, about the life we'd built together over 43 years. My name is Eleanor, though most folks call me Ellie, and until 5 days ago, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. Married to a good man who still brought me coffee in bed every morning, mother to 2 successful children who'd made something of themselves, grandmother to 3 beautiful grandkids who called every Sunday without fail. We weren't rich, Robert and I, but we had enough. A small house with a garden where I grew tomatoes every summer, a reliable truck that Robert kept running with his mechanic's knowledge, and most importantly, we had each other. Robert worked at the chemical plant for 35 years, never missed a day except when our children were born. He was the kind of man who fixed things for neighbors without being asked, who remembered everyone's birthday, who still held my hand when we walked through the grocery store. Simple pleasures, simple life, but it was ours and it was good. Our son James had become a lawyer, worked at some fancy firm downtown with glass walls and leather furniture that cost more than our car. He married Patricia, a real estate agent with perfectly manicured nails and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. They lived in a house 3 times the size of ours, drove matching BMWs, sent their kids to private school. Success story, everyone said. The American dream. Our daughter Linda worked in finance, something with investments that I never quite understood no matter how many times she explained it. She'd married young, divorced young, and now lived alone in a penthouse apartment with a view of the city that took your breath away. She was always busy, always on her phone, always had somewhere more important to be. But she was successful, independent, everything a modern woman should be. I was proud of them, of course I was. Robert and I had worked extra shifts, skipped vacations, driven the same car for 15 years so they could go to college without debt. We'd given them everything we could, and they'd taken those opportunities and run with them. That's what parents do, right? You sacrifice so your children can have better than you did. But something had changed in recent years, so gradually I almost didn't notice. The Sunday calls became monthly, then just holidays. The visits became shorter, more distracted. And always there were questions about money. When were we going to sell the house and move into something smaller? Why didn't we travel while we could still enjoy it? Had we thought about updating our will? Did we really need all that life insurance? Robert laughed it off. They're just worried about us, Ellie, he'd say. Want to make sure we're taken care of. But I saw the way James looked around our living room, calculating. I noticed how Patricia's eyes lingered on the china cabinet that had been Robert's mother's. I heard Linda on the phone in the bathroom during Thanksgiving, telling someone that her inheritance was her retirement plan. Still, they were our children. Blood of our blood. You don't stop loving your kids just because they've become people you don't quite recognize. You tell yourself they're busy, they're stressed, they'll come back to their roots eventually. You make excuses because the alternative is accepting that you raise strangers. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Robert had gone to work early, wanted to finish a project before the weekend. I was in the garden, picking the last tomatoes before frost, when James's car pulled into the driveway. I knew before he opened his mouth. You don't live with someone for 43 years without developing a sixth sense for disaster. There'd been an explosion at the plant. A chemical leak, they said, then a spark from somewhere. Robert and 2 other men were in that section. They didn't suffer, James said, like that was supposed to be a comfort. Quick and instant, no pain. I remember thinking what a strange thing to focus on, the absence of suffering, when my whole world had just exploded too. Linda arrived within an hour, must have broken every speed limit getting there. She hugged me, but it was brief, distracted. She was already on her phone with the plant's insurance company before Robert's body had even been recovered. James was calling funeral homes, comparing prices like he was shopping for a car. Patricia showed up with a folder of paperwork. Had already contacted a lawyer about wrongful death suits. They were so efficient, so prepared. Like they'd rehearsed this, practiced their roles. The grieving son who took charge. The practical daughter who handled finances. The supportive daughter-in-law who managed logistics. Everyone knew their part except me. I was just supposed to sit there and grieve while they handled everything. The funeral was arranged for Friday. 3 days to say goodbye to 43 years. James said it was better to do it quickly, help with closure. Linda said the insurance wouldn't pay out until after the service. Patricia picked out the cheapest coffin that wouldn't embarrass them in front of their friends. I wanted to object, wanted to be part of planning my own husband's funeral, but the words wouldn't come. Grief is like that sometimes, it steals your voice right when you need it most. They brought me a dress to wear, black and appropriate. Nothing like the floral prints Robert always said made me look like sunshine. They wrote the obituary, leaving out all the important things like how he sang in the shower or that he'd taught half the neighborhood kids to ride bikes. They chose the flowers, white lilies that would have made Robert sneeze. The viewing was Thursday night. Closed casket, of course, given the accident. I put my hand on the polished wood and felt nothing. No connection, no sense of Robert inside. Just cold wood and brass handles and the overwhelming smell of those damn lilies. People filed past, offering condolences, sharing memories, but all I could think was how wrong it all felt. James and Linda stood on either side of me like guards, accepting sympathy with practiced phrases. "Thank you for coming. He would have appreciated it. We're holding up as well as can be expected." But their eyes kept drifting to their phones, checking the time, checking messages, checking everything except on me. That night I couldn't sleep. The house felt different without Robert's snoring, without his warmth on the other side of the bed. I wandered into his workshop in the garage, just to smell the sawdust and motor oil, to feel close to him. His tools were all in their places, each one labeled with his careful handwriting. The project he'd been working on, a jewelry box for my birthday next month, sat half-finished on the bench. There was a photo tucked into the corner of his toolboard, from our anniversary last year. We'd gone to that little Italian place we loved, the one with the checkered tablecloths and the owner who always gave us free dessert. Robert had asked a waiter to take our picture, and we looked so happy. Not young anymore, both of us gray and wrinkled, but happy in that deep, settled way that comes from decades of choosing each other every single day. I must have stood there for an hour just looking at that photo when I noticed something else. A manila envelope tucked behind his drill press, somewhere only someone really looking would find it. Inside were bank statements, but not from our regular accounts. These were ones I'd never seen before, in Robert's name only, with deposits going back years. Small amounts, 50 here, 100 there, but it added up to nearly $30,000. There was a note paperclipped to the statements in Robert's handwriting. "For Ellie, just in case. Don't tell the kids. Don't tell the kids." Why would he write that? Why would he hide money from our own children? I put the envelope back where I found it, my hands shaking. There were too many questions and my brain was too foggy with grief to process them. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and drizzly. Appropriate weather for saying goodbye. James and Patricia picked me up early, said it would be easier than me driving myself. Linda met us at the church, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage. She hugged me, quick and efficient, then went to talk to the funeral director about final details. The church filled up slowly. Robert's co-workers from the plant, neighbors, folks from the senior center where we played cards on Wednesdays. Our pastor, Reverend Mills, had known us for 20 years, had baptized our grandchildren. He spoke about Robert's kindness, his dedication, his faith. All true things, but they felt like words about a stranger. The Robert he described was one-dimensional. A good man but not the complex, funny, sometimes stubborn person I'd loved. I sat in the front pew between James and Linda, feeling small and lost. Behind us, Patricia was whispering to someone on her phone about meeting with the insurance adjuster on Monday. James kept checking his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. Linda was typing on her phone, hidden just below the pew, but I could see the screen reflecting off her glasses. That's when my own phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. Who texts during a funeral? But it buzzed again, insistent. I glanced down at my purse, saw the screen lighting up through the fabric. Without thinking, moving on instinct, I pulled it out just enough to see. Unknown number. 4 words that made my heart stop. He's not in the coffin. I stared at the message, sure I was misreading it. My grief was making me see things that weren't there. But no, there was in black and white. He's not in the coffin. The phone buzzed again. Do not trust the children. My hand jerked, almost dropping the phone. James noticed, leaned over to whisper, "You okay, Mom?" I nodded, sliding the phone back into my purse, my heart hammering so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "Fine," I managed to say. "Just someone sending condolences." The rest of the service passed in a blur. I stood when they told me to stand, sat when they told me to sit, but my mind was racing. He's not in the coffin. What did that mean? Was this some cruel prank? Someone's idea of a sick joke? But who would do such a thing? And why warn me about my own children? At the graveside, as they lowered the coffin into the ground, I watched James and Linda. They stood perfectly still, faces composed in what they probably thought was appropriate grief. But their eyes were dry. Not a single tear between them. Patricia was already on her phone again, and I heard her mention something about probate. Back at the house for the reception, people milled around eating the cold cuts and casseroles neighbors had brought. James cornered me in the kitchen while I was refilling the coffee pot. "Mom, we need to talk about the house," he said, not even pretending this wasn't about money. "It's too big for you now." Patricia found a nice retirement community, very elegant, great medical care. "I just buried your father an hour ago," I said, my voice sharper than intended. I know," he said, having the decency to look slightly ashamed. "But these things need to be handled. The house is worth at least $400,000 in this market. Plus Dad's life insurance, the settlement from the plant, your savings. You could live very comfortably, and there'd still be enough for everyone." For everyone. Meaning him and Linda. Meaning they'd already calculated their inheritance while their father's grave was still fresh. "We'll talk about it later," I said, turning away. But James grabbed my arm, gentle but firm. "Mom, Linda and I have power of attorney, remember? We're just trying to help you make good decisions." I remembered signing those papers 5 years ago when Robert had his gallbladder surgery. Just in case, the kids had said. Just for emergencies. Now I wondered if they'd been planning this even then. The reception dragged on. I smiled, accepted condolences, pretended everything was normal while those 4 words echoed in my head. He's not in the coffin. By the time everyone left, I was exhausted but also oddly energized. I needed to know what that message meant. That night, alone in the house for the first time since Robert died, I sat with my phone, staring at those messages. I tried calling the number, but it just rang and rang. I texted back. "Who is this? What do you mean?" But there was no response. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that coffin being lowered into the ground. But was Robert really in there? How could he not be? I'd seen the death certificate. The plant had confirmed the accident. There was security footage of the explosion. 3 men had died. It was real. Had to be real. Unless it wasn't. At 3 in the morning I gave up on sleep and went back to Robert's workshop. That envelope of bank statements called to me. I studied them more carefully this time, noticing patterns. The deposits always came after Robert worked overtime or did side jobs. Money he'd earned but hadn't put in our joint accounts. Money the kids didn't know about. Why would he hide it? We'd never kept secrets about money before. We'd always been a team making decisions together. Unless he'd noticed what I'd been trying not to see. That our children weren't who we'd raised them to be. That they saw us not as parents but as a future payday. My phone buzzed again. Checked the death certificate carefully. This time I didn't hesitate. I found the copy James had given me, supposedly from the county office. First glance, it looked official. Robert Allen Mitchell, age 68, died from injuries sustained in an industrial accident. But as I looked closer, I noticed something. The seal was slightly off-center. The signature of the county clerk was different from the one on our marriage license. Small things but wrong. I needed to see the official version. But the county office wouldn't open until Monday, and James was already pushing to start the insurance claims. I had to stall, had to investigate without them knowing. The next morning, Saturday, James and Patricia came by with boxes. "We thought we'd help you start sorting Dad's things," Patricia said with that fake smile. "No sense keeping stuff you won't need." I watched them go through Robert's clothes, his books, his collections of old coins and baseball cards. They were so methodical, checking pockets, looking behind picture frames, searching for what? Hidden money, insurance policies, or evidence of something else. "Mom, where's Dad's phone?" James asked suddenly. "The police said they didn't find it at the scene." "I don't know," I lied. "Robert's phone was in my nightstand drawer where I'd put it after the hospital returned his personal effects. I hadn't been able to look at it yet, but now I wondered what might be on it." That afternoon, while James and Patricia were loading boxes into their car, I locked myself in the bathroom and went through Robert's phone. His passcode was still our anniversary date. Most of it was normal, work emails, photos of the grandkids, his daily word puzzle game. But in his notes app I found something strange. A list of dates and observations. James asking about life insurance. May 15th. Linda suggesting I update my will. June 2nd. Patricia photographing house for memories, but focusing on valuables. June 20th. James requesting power of attorney renewal. July 8th. Overheard Linda on phone saying, "Both need to go." August 10th. Both need to go. The words sent ice through my veins. There was more. Research about poisoning symptoms that mimic heart conditions. Screenshots of our insurance policies. A voice memo labeled "just in case" that I was too scared to play yet. And in his photos, pictures I didn't remember him taking. James meeting with someone in a parking garage. Linda at a lawyer's office that wasn't her usual firm. Documents on Patricia's computer screen, zoomed in from across the room. Robert had been investigating our own children. My phone buzzed. The workshop. Under the floorboard beneath the toolbox. I waited until James and Patricia left, then went to the garage. Sure enough, one floorboard was loose under Robert's heavy toolbox. Inside the hidden space were more documents. Medical records showing Robert had been tested for poisoning 3 months ago. Results showing trace amounts of antifreeze in his system. A letter from a private investigator confirming surveillance on James and Linda. And most damning, a will dated just 2 weeks ago leaving everything to me with specific instructions that the children receive nothing if I died within a year of him. He'd known. Robert had known our children were trying to kill us. My phone rang. Unknown number. This time I answered. Mrs. Mitchell. The voice was familiar but I couldn't place it. "This is Tom Rodriguez. I worked with Robert at the plant." Tom, yes, I remembered him. Young guy, Robert had been training him. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm sorry for the cryptic messages, but I didn't know who might be watching you. Robert asked me to contact you if anything happened to him. He said you'd be in danger." "What are you talking about? Where's Robert? Is he really dead?" There was a pause. The explosion was real, but Robert wasn't there. He'd gotten my warning that morning, stayed home sick. The body they found, it was too damaged to identify properly, but the plant assumed it was Robert since he was scheduled for that shift. "Your children identified the body without requesting DNA testing." My legs gave out. I sank onto Robert's workshop stool. "He's alive." "I don't know," Tom said carefully. "He was supposed to contact me after the funeral, but I haven't heard from him. He said if something happened, if he went silent, to tell you everything. He has evidence that James and Linda have been slowly poisoning you both. Small doses in food when they visit, hoping to cause organ failure that would look natural. That explained the stomach problems I'd been having lately, the fatigue Robert had complained about. We thought it was just age. He also found out they'd paid someone at the plant to cause an accident," Tom continued. "They wanted you both dead but needed it to look accidental for the insurance. The explosion wasn't supposed to happen when it did. Robert was investigating, gathering evidence to go to the police. Where is he now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know. He said he had a safe place to hide until after the funeral. Wanted to see who showed up, who was involved. But he should have contacted me by now. The house suddenly felt dangerous. Every shadow could hide someone watching. Every creak could be someone entering. My own children wanted me dead. Tom, what do I do? Normal. Don't let them know you know. I'm sending you copies of everything Robert gathered. Take it to Detective Morrison at the police station. He's the only one Robert trusted. And Mrs. Mitchell. Don't eat or drink anything your children give you. After Tom hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of the garage, trying to process everything. My husband might be alive. My children were trying to kill us. The life I thought I had was a complete lie. My phone buzzed with an email from Tom. Dozens of documents, recordings, photos. The evidence Robert had gathered over months of suspecting his own children. Bank records showing James had massive gambling debts. Investment statements showing Linda had lost everything in bad trades. They didn't just want our money, they desperately needed it. There was an audio file labeled Family Dinner July 4th. I put in my earbuds and listened to my children discussing our deaths like they were planning a vacation. James's voice. The antifreeze is too slow. We need something more decisive. Linda. If we increase the dose, it'll show up in toxicology. We need it to look natural. Patricia. What about an accident? The brakes on their car are already worn. James, too risky. Could survive a car accident. The plant idea is better. Industrial accidents happen all the time. Linda. Both of them need to go at the same time. If one survives, they'll change the will. Patricia. Your mother's getting suspicious. She mentioned feeling sick after Sunday dinner. James. We'll be more careful. Small doses, patience. By Christmas, it'll all be over. By Christmas, it'll all be over. They'd planned to have us dead by Christmas. I listened to recording after recording. My children, the babies I'd nursed, the toddlers I'd taught to walk, the teenagers I'd driven to countless practices and recitals, calmly discussing the best way to murder their parents. Sunday morning I knew they'd come by. It was our tradition, Sunday breakfast after church. Sure enough, Linda arrived first with a box of pastries from my favorite bakery. I thought we could have a nice breakfast, just family, she said, already pulling plates from the cabinet. You need to eat, Mom. Keep your strength up. I watched her set the table, noticed how she touched each cup, each plate. Was she putting something on them? How many Sunday breakfasts had I unknowingly been poisoned? James and Patricia arrived with fresh orange juice and flowers. So thoughtful. So caring. So deadly. Mom, you look tired, James said, pouring juice into my glass. You need to take better care of yourself. I pretended to sip the juice, then set it down when they weren't looking. I nibbled at a pastry but spit it into my napkin when I pretended to cough. Every bite could be poison. Every sip could be death. We've been thinking, Linda said, and you should really consider that retirement community. You could sell the house this week, be moved in by month's end. That's rather fast, I said carefully. Well, the market's good now, Patricia chimed in. And James knows someone who'd buy it cash, no inspection needed. No inspection. So no one would find whatever evidence Robert might have hidden. I'll think about it, I said. James frowned. Mom, we're just trying to help. Don't you trust us? The question hung in the air. Did I trust them? These children I'd raised, loved, sacrificed everything for? The answer was devastating in its simplicity. Well, I didn't trust them at all. After they left, I dumped everything they'd brought down the garbage disposal and ran water for 5 minutes. Then I drove to the police station with a USB drive containing all of Tom's files. Detective Morrison was there, an older black man with kind eyes and coffee stains on his tie. He listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally taking notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. Mrs. Mitchell, these are serious accusations. Your children are respected members of the community. I know how it sounds, I said, but the evidence is all here. The recordings, the medical tests, the financial records. They killed my husband. Or tried to. He spent 2 hours going through everything. His expression grew more grim with each document, each recording. Finally he looked up. This is enough for a warrant. We'll search their homes, their computers. But Mrs. Mitchell, if your husband is alive, we need to find him. He's our key witness. I don't know where he is, I admitted. I haven't heard from him directly, only through Tom. Detective Morrison made some calls. Within an hour, there were discreet surveillance teams watching James and Linda. He sent officers to quietly interview Tom, to verify the plant explosion details, to check hospital records for unidentified bodies. Go home, he told me. Normal. We'll handle this quietly until we know more. And Mrs. Mitchell, don't be alone with your children. That evening my phone rang. James. Mom, we're coming over. We need to discuss the house sale. I'm tired, James. Can't it wait? No, it can't. We'll be there in 20 minutes. I called Detective Morrison immediately. He said they'd have undercover officers nearby. Just stay calm, he said. We're watching. But I wasn't calm. My hands shook as I waited. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. When the doorbell rang, I almost didn't answer it. But I had to maintain the pretense, had to act like the grieving, confused widow they expected. James and Linda entered without invitation, Patricia close behind. They had documents with them, contracts for the house sale, papers for me to sign. This is what's best, Mom, Linda said, putting the papers in front of me. The buyer is offering above market value, but only if we close immediately. I need time to read these, I said. There's no time, James snapped, his mask finally slipping. Sign them now. Whoa. The word hung between us like a challenge. James's face flushed red. Linda's hands clenched. Patricia moved to block the doorway. Mom, James said, his voice dangerous now, you're not thinking clearly. The grief, the stress. Maybe you need medical help. We could have you evaluated, declared incompetent. You'd do that? Yes. To your own mother. Something flickered in Linda's eyes. Maybe shame, maybe just annoyance at the delay. Just sign the papers, she said. Make this easy on everyone. Or what? The words came out before I could stop them. You'll kill me like you killed your father. The silence was deafening. They all froze, staring at me. Then James laughed, forced and hollow. You're confused, Mom. Dad died in an accident. No, he didn't. You paid someone to cause that explosion. You've been poisoning us for months. I know everything. Patricia pulled out her phone, started typing rapidly. Calling for help. Warning someone. I didn't care anymore. The truth was out. You're sick, Mom, Linda said, but her voice was shaking. You need help. We're calling an ambulance, getting you psychiatric care. I have the recordings, I said. I have the evidence. The police have it all. James lunged forward, grabbing for the papers, but the front door burst open. Police officers flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. James tried to run but was tackled in the hallway. Linda dropped to her knees, hands behind her head, all that practiced composure finally cracking. Patricia just stood there, mouth open, phone falling from her hand. As they handcuffed my children, reading them their rights, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, just a terrible emptiness. These weren't my babies anymore. Maybe they never had been. Maybe the children I thought I'd raised had only existed in my imagination. Detective Morrison put his hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Mrs. Mitchell. You saved your own life. But what about Robert? Where was my husband? The answer came 3 hours later. They'd found him at a motel 2 towns over, registered under a false name Tom had provided. He was alive but badly injured. After getting Tom's warning about the explosion, he'd stayed home, but James had come by the house, looking for documents. There'd been a confrontation. Robert had evidence of everything, was going to the police. James had attacked him, thought he'd killed him, then rushed to the plant to establish an alibi when the explosion happened. But Robert had survived, barely. Managed to call Tom, who'd helped him hide while gathering the final evidence. He'd been planning to come forward after the funeral, after seeing who was involved, but infection from his injuries had left him unconscious for days. I rode in the ambulance with him to the hospital, holding his hand while the EMTs worked. His eyes fluttered open once, focused on me. "Ellie," he whispered. "Sorry. Wanted to protect you." "You did," I told him, tears streaming down my face. "You saved us both." The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of our children's plan. They'd been plotting for over a year, since Linda's investments failed and James's gambling debts reached 6 figures. They'd researched poisons, studied our routines, gradually increased our life insurance policies using their power of attorney. Patricia had been the mastermind in many ways, pushing James, providing the technical knowledge from her real estate dealings about forging documents. The plant explosion had been their final solution when the poisoning proved too slow. They'd paid a maintenance worker $50,000 to cause a fatal accident, making it look like negligence for a bigger insurance payout. 3 innocent men had died because my children couldn't wait for their inheritance. The trial was a media sensation. Successful lawyer and financial advisor attempting to murder their parents for money. Every sordid detail was exposed. The gradual poisoning, the elaborate planning, the cold calculation of it all. James got life without parole for the murders at the plant. Linda got 25 to life for attempted murder and conspiracy. Patricia got 15 years as an accomplice. During the sentencing, the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I stood, looked at my children one last time, and spoke from my heart. "I gave you everything. Every sacrifice a parent could make, I made. Every opportunity one could provide, I provided. I loved you with every fiber of my being from the moment you were born. And this is what you became. Not because of poverty or abuse or neglect, but because of greed. Simple, ugly greed. You had successful careers, beautiful homes, your own children, but it wasn't enough. You wanted what we'd spent a lifetime building, and you were willing to kill us for it." James wouldn't look at me. Linda was crying, but I didn't believe her tears anymore. Patricia stared straight ahead, no emotion at all. "I forgive you," I continued, and the courtroom gasped. "Not for your sake, but for mine and your father's. We refuse to spend our remaining years poisoned by hatred the way you tried to poison our bodies. We'll live, we'll heal, and we'll try to remember the children you were before greed consumed you." Robert recovered slowly but fully. The trauma of being attacked by his own son, of discovering the murder plot, of hiding while I buried an empty coffin, it changed him. He was quieter, more careful, trusted less easily. We both did. When you discover the people you created are capable of destroying you, it changes how you see the world. We sold the house, too many memories, both good and bad. Bought a smaller place near the ocean, somewhere we'd always talked about retiring but never thought we could afford. Funny how surviving your children's murder plot makes you reevaluate your priorities. The grandchildren were the hardest part. James's kids were teenagers, old enough to understand what their parents had done. Linda didn't have children, thank God. We tried to maintain relationships with the grandkids, but it was complicated. How do you explain that daddy's in prison because he tried to kill grandma and grandpa? Their other grandparents got custody, and slowly those relationships faded. Another casualty of our children's greed. Tom Rodriguez became like a son to us, the son we should have had. He visited regularly, brought his wife and kids for holidays. He never asked for anything, never mentioned the inheritance that would have gone to James and Linda. When Robert tried to talk about changing our will to include him, Tom refused. Said he had parents of his own, that his friendship wasn't about money. Imagine that. Someone caring about us without calculating our net worth. The news coverage eventually died down, but our story became a cautionary tale. Estate planning lawyers used it as an example of why you need safeguards. Elder abuse organizations cited it in their fundraising. True crime podcasts dissected every detail. We became famous for the worst thing that ever happened to us. 5 years passed. We learned James had been killed in prison, something about a debt he couldn't pay. I felt nothing when I heard. The son I'd mourned was already dead. Had been dead long before his body stopped breathing. Linda wrote letters from prison, begging forgiveness, claiming she'd been manipulated by James and Patricia. I never answered. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and I couldn't forget those recordings of her calmly discussing our murders over coffee. Patricia was released after serving 10 years, early for good behavior. She moved across the country, changed her name, tried to disappear. But the internet never forgets. Last I heard, she was working at a gas station somewhere in Nevada. All those real estate dreams as dead as her marriage to my son. Robert and I grew old together, really old, the kind of old we'd feared we'd never see. Wrinkled and gray, moving slower each year, but alive. Alive despite our children's best efforts. Every morning when Robert brought me coffee, every evening when we sat watching the sunset over the ocean, we chose to be grateful. Not for what we'd lost, but for what we'd survived. The money from the life insurance policies our children had taken out on us, the settlement from the plant for the actual victims' families, the sale of the house, it all went to charity. Every penny. We kept enough to live simply, comfortably, but we didn't want wealth anymore. We'd seen what the promise of inheritance could do, how it could twist love into greed, family into enemies. On our 50th wedding anniversary, we renewed our vows. Just us, Tom and his family, and the pastor who'd become our friend. No fancy reception, no elaborate ceremony, just promises to continue choosing each other every day we had left. Robert's hands shook as he put the ring on my finger again, and mine shook as I put his on. We'd earned every tremor, every wrinkle, every gray hair. During the small reception, Tom's 8-year-old daughter asked why we didn't have other family there. Children ask the questions adults are too polite to voice. Sometimes families are the people who choose to love you, not just the ones who are supposed to, I told her. Uncle Robert and I are each other's family. You're our family. Love makes family, not blood. She seemed satisfied with that answer, ran off to play. But I saw Tom's wife crying, saw Robert reach for my hand. We'd built a different kind of family, smaller but genuine, based on choice rather than obligation. That night, as we lay in bed listening to the ocean, Robert asked if I ever regretted having children. It was the first time he'd asked so directly. I thought for a long time before answering. I regret who they became, I said finally. But I don't regret the years when they were young, when they were still ours. Before money mattered more than love. Those years were real, even if what came after was a lie. He pulled me closer, and we fell asleep like that. Two survivors holding on to each other in the dark. The phone calls started on a Tuesday, exactly 10 years after the funeral where I'd gotten that first message. Unknown number, just like before. But when I answered, there was only breathing, then a click. It happened 3 times before I called Detective Morrison, now retired but still a friend. Probably nothing, he said, but be careful. Patricia's been asking about you too. What could she want now? There was no money left to steal, no inheritance to claim. We were just 2 old people living by the ocean, no threat to anyone. But the calls continued. Sometimes breathing, sometimes crying. Once I could swear I heard someone say Mom before the line went dead. I changed our number, but somehow the calls found us again. Then came the letter, no return address, postmarked from Nevada. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 5 words. I know what really happened. Robert wanted to ignore it, but I couldn't. After everything we'd been through, I'd learned to trust my instincts. Something was wrong. Someone knew something or thought they did. A week later, Patricia showed up at our door. She looked nothing like the polished real estate agent who'd helped plan our murders. Her hair was gray now, cut short and practical. Her clothes were worn secondhand. Her face had aged 20 years in the 10 she'd been away. But her eyes were the same, calculating, always calculating. I didn't invite her in. Robert stood behind me, his hand on my shoulder, ready to call the police if needed. What do you want? I asked. To warn you, she said. Someone's been asking questions about Dad's death. About the body in the coffin. We know what happened, Robert said coldly. You helped plan it. Patricia shook her head. No, you don't understand. The body they buried, it wasn't the plant worker everyone thought it was. I know because James told me. He killed someone else that morning, A homeless man who looked similar enough. The plant explosion was just cover. My blood ran cold. Another murder. Another family destroyed by our children's greed. Why are you telling us this? Yes. Because whoever's asking questions knows about the homeless man. They've been tracking down everyone involved, asking about that morning, about who was really in that coffin. They came to see me last week. They know things, details only someone who was there could know. Who are they? Robert demanded. Patricia looked genuinely scared for the first time since I'd known her. She said she was his daughter. The homeless man's daughter. Said her father disappeared 10 years ago, the same day as the plant explosion. She's been searching ever since, and somehow she figured out the connection. We stood there in terrible silence. Another victim. Another family destroyed. How many lives had our children ruined in their pursuit of money that was never theirs? She wants justice, Patricia continued. Real justice. She knows the statute of limitations hasn't run out on murder charges for the homeless man. She could get James's case reopened posthumously, prove premeditated murder of someone besides the plant workers. It would all come out again, everything but worse. James is dead, I said. What justice is there in pursuing a dead man? But Patricia wasn't looking at us anymore. She was looking over our shoulders, at someone approaching from behind. A woman, maybe 40, with tired eyes and worn clothes, holding a folder thick with papers. Mrs. Mitchell, she said, ignoring Patricia entirely. My name is Grace Patterson. I believe your son murdered my father. We all stood frozen in that doorway, for people bound together by horror. I invited Grace in. What else could I do? Patricia tried to leave, but Grace stopped her. Stay. You were part of this. You know what happened. We sat in our small living room, the ocean breeze bringing in salt and the sound of waves, while Grace told us her story. Her father, William Patterson, had been a veteran who'd struggled with mental illness and addiction. He'd been homeless for 5 years, but Grace had never stopped trying to help him, never stopped hoping he'd come home. He called me the night before he disappeared, Grace said, tears streaming down her face. Said he'd met someone who offered him a job, a chance to start over. He was so happy, so hopeful. I was supposed to pick him up the next morning, take him to get cleaned up for his new job. But when I got there, he was gone. She'd searched for 10 years. Filed missing person reports that went nowhere because homeless people disappear all the time. Checked morgues, hospitals, jails. Nothing. Until 6 months ago, when a retired police officer with a guilty conscience told her about irregularities in the plant explosion case. About a body that was identified too quickly, about missing DNA tests, about a family eager to bury evidence along with a coffin. I've been investigating ever since, Grace said, pulling out documents. Financial records showing James withdrew $50,000 in cash the day before. Security footage from near the homeless camps showing his car. A witness who saw him talking to a man matching my father's description. And this. He pulled out a photo. Security footage from a gas station. Grainy but clear enough. James leading a man into his car. The man was smiling, hopeful, trusting. William Patterson, about to die for looking enough like Robert to fool a cursory inspection. He murdered my father to cover up his attempted murder of his own father, Grace said, her voice breaking. Used him like a prop, like he wasn't even human. Then buried him under your husband's name while you all stood there grieving someone who wasn't even dead. The weight of it was crushing. We'd buried a stranger, mourned over the wrong body, been saved by the death of an innocent man. William Patterson had died because he had the misfortune of resembling Robert enough for James's plan. I'm so sorry, I whispered, reaching for Grace's hands. Had no idea. We thought the body was too damaged from the explosion to identify. We never imagined. Grace pulled her hands away. Your son was a monster. But you raised him. How does someone become capable of this? It was the question I'd asked myself 1,000 times. How had the baby I'd nursed become a killer? How had the toddler who brought me dandelions become someone who poisoned my food? How had the boy who cried when our dog died become someone who murdered a stranger without remorse? I don't know, I admitted. We gave them everything. Love, opportunity, values, faith. Somewhere along the way, greed consumed them. But that's an explanation, not an excuse. Nothing excuses what they did to your father. Patricia had been silent, but now she spoke. Can testify. I know where James kept records. Documents he thought he'd destroyed, but I copied. I can prove he killed that man. Why would you do that? Grace asked suspiciously. Because I've spent 10 years trying to atone for what I helped plan, Patricia said quietly. Because I have children of my own now, and I need them to know their mother tried to make things right, even if it was too late. We spent hours going through evidence, building a case for a murder that was a decade old. Grace had done impressive work, tracking down witnesses, following paper trails, connecting dots no one else had bothered to connect. She had enough to reopen the case, to prove William Patterson had been murdered, to clear his name and give him the dignity of being properly identified. But there was a problem. James was dead. You can't prosecute a dead man. And while Patricia could be charged with conspiracy for this additional murder, she'd already served time for the attempted murders. The legal system had already had its say. I want him exhumed, Grace said suddenly. The body in that grave isn't Robert Mitchell. It's my father. He deserves to be buried under his own name, to have a proper funeral, to be mourned by people who actually loved him. It would mean everything coming out again. The media storm, the renewed attention, the whole terrible story with this new horrifying chapter. But looking at Grace's face, at the decade of pain and searching etched there, how could we refuse? We'll support you, Robert said firmly. Whatever you need to do, we'll help. Your father deserves justice, even if it's delayed. The process was complicated. Legal petitions, court hearings, DNA tests to prove the body wasn't Robert. The media picked up the story immediately. Family thought they buried father, but body was murdered homeless veteran. It was sensational, tragic, perfect for the news cycle that fed on misery. Patricia testified as promised, providing documents and recordings that proved James had planned William Patterson's murder as a backup plan. If the plant explosion failed to kill Robert, he'd need a body to bury. He'd been stalking homeless camps for weeks, looking for someone the right age and build. William Patterson just had the bad luck of trusting the wrong person. The DNA results confirmed what Grace had known in her heart. The body we'd buried with full honors as Robert Mitchell was actually William Patterson, veteran, father, human being who deserved so much better than becoming a prop in my son's murderous plot. We held a second funeral, a real one this time. Grace had found other veterans from her father's unit, old friends from before his struggles began. They came to honor him, to give him the military funeral he'd earned. Robert and I paid for everything, the least we could do for the man who'd unknowingly died in Robert's place. At the service, Grace spoke about her father. Not the homeless man he'd become, but the man he'd been. A soldier who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan. A father who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd read her bedtime stories, who'd walked her down the aisle at her wedding just before the PTSD and addiction took hold. A human being who deserved dignity and compassion, not murder and anonymity. When she finished, she looked at Robert and me. Your son stole 10 years of hope from me. 10 years when I could have been grieving instead of searching. 10 years of not knowing, of imagining the worst, of blaming myself for not doing more. But my father is at peace now. He has his name back. That's all I wanted. After the service, Patricia approached us one last time. She had something else to confess, something she'd never told anyone. James had practiced, she said. Before William Patterson, he'd tried the murder plan on others. There might be more bodies, more families searching for answers. The investigation that followed uncovered 2 more victims. Homeless men who'd disappeared around the same time, whose bodies were never found. James had been perfecting his technique, learning how to lure vulnerable people with promises of work, how to kill without leaving evidence, how to dispose of bodies. My son hadn't just been a would-be parent killer. He'd been a serial murderer. The news broke what was left of my heart. Every crime they uncovered, every victim they identified, was another weight on my soul. How had I created this? How had I given birth to such evil? Robert's health declined after that. The stress, the revelations, the constant media attention. It was too much for his heart that had already survived one murder attempt. He had a stroke on a Tuesday morning while reading the newspaper. Another article about James's victims. He lived, but he was never the same. His speech slurred, his left side weak. His memory fading in and out like a radio with bad reception. I became his caretaker, helping him walk, helping him remember, helping him find peace with the horror our life had become. On good days, he knew me, smiled when I brought his coffee, held my hand while we watched the ocean. On bad days, he called for children who were dead or imprisoned, forgetting why they never came. Linda wrote again from prison, claiming she hadn't known about the murders, that James had hidden that from her. Maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't. I didn't have the energy to care anymore. She was serving her time, facing her consequences. That had to be enough. Tom and his family remained our constants, visiting every week, bringing groceries and grandchildren's laughter. They never asked about the latest revelations, never treated us differently despite knowing we'd raised a monster. They just loved us simply and genuinely the way family should. One evening, as I was helping Robert into bed, he grabbed my hand with his good one and spoke clearly for the first time in weeks. "Ellie," he said, "we survived. Despite everything, we survived. Was it worth it?" I asked the question that haunted me. All this pain, all these revelations, all these victims. Should we have just let them kill us quietly? He thought for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "Because Grace deserved the truth. Those other families deserved answers. The truth is terrible, but it's better than lies." He was right, of course. The truth, no matter how horrible, was better than the elaborate fiction our children had tried to create. William Patterson had his name back. Other families had closure. Justice, imperfect and delayed, had been served. Robert died peacefully 2 years later, on a Sunday morning while I held his hand. His last words were, "I love you, Ellie. Always have." Simple, true, everything our children's words had never been. I buried him properly this time, in a small cemetery overlooking the ocean. The headstone read Robert Allen Mitchell, beloved husband, survivor, truth-teller. Tom gave the eulogy, talking about the man who'd mentored him, who'd shown him what integrity looked like, who'd faced his own children's evil and chosen justice over silence. Grace came to the funeral. She brought flowers, white roses, because she'd remembered I didn't like lilies. We stood together at the graveside, two women bound by loss and truth. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not hiding from what James did, for helping me find my father, for showing that some parents do the right thing even when it destroys them." After the funeral, I found a letter Robert had left for me, hidden in his workshop where he'd always hidden important things. His handwriting was shaky, affected by the stroke, but the words were clear. "Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But you're still here, still fighting, still standing. I'm so proud of you. We raised monsters, but we didn't become monsters. We chose truth over comfort, justice over silence, other people's children over our own. That takes a courage I didn't know we had. Live the rest of your life free from guilt. We did our best with James and Linda. Something went wrong, something we couldn't have predicted or prevented. But look at the family we built afterward. Tom, his children, even Grace in her way. That's our true legacy. The money doesn't matter. The house doesn't matter. Even the pain doesn't matter in the end. What matters is that we loved each other truly, that we stood for what was right, that we survived. Be happy, Ellie. You've earned it. Find peace in small things like I found peace in bringing you coffee each morning. The monster our son became doesn't define us. Our choice to stop him does. All my love, always, Robert." I folded the letter carefully, placed it with our wedding photos and the pictures of Tom's children who called us grandparents. The evidence of the life we'd built after the destruction. The family we'd chosen after our blood family chose greed over love. I'm 93 now, living in a senior community that's nothing like the one James and Patricia tried to force me into. This one I chose myself, paid for with the simple savings Robert and I had protected. Tom visits every Sunday, bringing his grandchildren now, a third generation who knows us only as the great-grandparents who love them. Sometimes reporters still call, wanting to revisit the story for true crime shows or podcasts. I always decline. The story has been told. The truth is public record. The dead have been properly named and buried. There's nothing left to say. Except this. When that phone buzzed during Robert's funeral, when those impossible words appeared on the screen, when everything I thought I knew shattered like glass, I had a choice. Ignore it, bury it, live the lie my children had constructed. Or pursue the truth, no matter how much it hurt, no matter what it revealed. Chose truth. We chose truth. And that choice, more than all the money our children tried to steal, more than the years they tried to take from us, more than the legacy they tried to destroy, that choice is what saved us. The message was right. He wasn't in the coffin. But more than that, the warning was right too. Don't trust the children. The hardest lesson a parent can learn is that giving birth to someone doesn't make them good. Raising them with love doesn't guarantee they'll love you back. Sacrificing everything for them doesn't mean they won't sacrifice you for money. But here's what I've learned in all these years since. Trust isn't inherited, it's earned. Love isn't owed, it's chosen. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who stand by you when your blood relatives are trying to kill you. And sometimes, the greatest act of love you can show your children is stopping them from becoming worse monsters than they already are. My phone doesn't buzz with mysterious messages anymore. There are no more secrets to uncover, no more bodies to identify, no more truths to reveal. Just quiet days by the window, watching the ocean, remembering the man who brought me coffee for 43 years and tried to protect me even from beyond what we thought was his grave. The children I raised are gone, one dead, one in prison for life. But the children I chose, Tom and his family, Grace in her own way, they're here. They're real. They're the family that grew from the ashes of the family that tried to burn us down. And in the end, that's enough. More than enough. It's everything. When my time comes, when I finally join Robert in that cemetery by the ocean, our headstones will tell a simple truth. We lived, we loved, we survived our children's attempts to kill us, and we chose justice over silence. Not the legacy we planned, but the legacy we earned. The pastor was right to stop that wedding all those years ago in Sarah's story. Just like that phone message was right to warn me during Robert's funeral. Sometimes the most disrupting moments, the ones that shatter our carefully constructed worlds, are actually saving us from something worse. A wedding built on lies, a funeral hiding murder. These aren't foundations for moving forward. They're prisons built from deception. Truth, terrible as it might be, sets you free. It freed Grace from 10 years of searching. It freed those other families from not knowing. It freed Patricia, in a way, from the guilt that had been eating her alive. And it freed Robert and me from dying as victims, letting us live as survivors instead. That's the real message, the one worth remembering. When your phone buzzes with impossible words, when someone tells you something that can't be true but somehow is, when the ground falls out from under everything you believed, you have a choice. Ignore it and live the lie, or face it and find the truth. Choose truth. Always choose truth. Even when it means discovering your children are monsters. Even when it means learning you buried a stranger. Even when it means everything you thought you knew was wrong. Because lies, no matter how comfortable, are still prisons. And truth, no matter how painful, is still freedom. The coffee Robert brought me every morning for 43 years was real. The love we shared was real. The choice to survive, to fight, to expose our children's crimes, that was real. Everything else, all the performance of perfect family, all the pretense of normal life, all of it was just elaborate deception waiting to collapse. Collapse. We survived. And in surviving, we discovered that the family you choose, the love you earn, the truth you fight for, these are worth more than any inheritance, any legacy, any blood relationship that comes with a price tag attached. My story ends here, with truth told and justice served, with the right names on the right graves, with a real family gathered close while the false family faces consequences. It's not the ending I would have written when I was young, when James took his first steps, when Linda said her first words. But it's the ending we earned, Robert and I, by choosing truth over comfortable lies. And that phone message, those 4 impossible words that started everything. They were the beginning of our salvation. He's not in the coffin. No, he wasn't. But more importantly, we weren't in the grave our children had dug for us. We climbed out, exposed them, and lived to tell the tale. That's survival. That's justice. That's the truth that sets you free, even when it first breaks your heart into pieces too small to count. The pieces eventually reassemble, differently than before, stronger in the broken places, held together by truth instead of assumptions, by chosen family instead of blood, by real love instead of performed obligation. The phone doesn't buzz anymore with mysterious messages. Doesn't need to. All the secrets are revealed, all the bodies properly buried, all the truths told. What remains is simple. A 93-year-old woman who survived her children's murder plot, who helped solve additional murders, who chose justice over silence, and who learned that family is defined by love, not blood. When those messages came through during what I thought was Robert's funeral, I could have ignored them. Should have, according to any reasonable person. But unreasonable moments sometimes require unreasonable courage. The courage to believe the impossible, to investigate the unthinkable, to expose the unbearable. That courage saved my life. It gave William Patterson back his name. It brought justice for other victims. It showed that truth, however delayed, however painful, eventually prevails over even the most elaborate deceptions. So when your phone buzzes with impossible news, when someone whispers warnings that can't be true, when the ground shifts beneath everything you thought you knew, remember this story. Remember that the message might be saving your life. Remember that the people you trust most might be the ones you should trust least. Remember that truth is worth pursuing, even when it leads to your own children's imprisonment. And remember Robert, who loved me enough to hide money from our children, who investigated their crimes while being slowly poisoned, who survived their murder attempt only to save evidence that would convict them. Remember William Patterson, who died for the crime of resembling my husband, whose daughter never gave up searching. Remember all the unnamed victims whose families finally got answers. But most of all, remember that survival isn't just about living through something. It's about choosing truth over lies, justice over silence, the family that chooses you over the family that would choose to kill you for money. It's about rebuilding from ashes, finding love in unexpected places, and discovering that the worst thing that happens to you might also lead to the best people you'll ever know. My phone is quiet now. No mysterious messages, no warnings, no impossible truths waiting to shatter my world. Just occasional texts from Tom, photos of his grandchildren, reminders that the family we built from the ruins is thriving. That's the real message, the one worth ending on. From the ashes of betrayal can grow something beautiful, something real, something worth surviving for. The funeral where I got that first message was supposed to be an ending. Instead, it was a beginning. The beginning of truth, of justice, of a different kind of family. The beginning of learning that love isn't about blood, it's about choice. And we choose. Every day Robert brought me coffee, every visit from Tom, every letter from Grace. We choose to build something better from the worst thing that ever happened to us. That's the message. That's the legacy. That's the truth that no elaborate lie can ever bury. No matter how deep the coffin, no matter how convincing the performance, no matter how much money is at stake. Truth survives. Love survives. We survived. And that survival, that choice to pursue truth no matter the cost, that's what transforms a tragedy into a testimony, a victim into a survivor, a message on a phone into the key that unlocks everything. The coffin was empty of who we thought was in it, but our lives became full of people who actually loved us. The children we raised tried to kill us, but the family we chose gave us reason to live. The funeral that should have been an ending became the beginning of the rest of our lives. Lives lived in truth instead of deception, with chosen family instead of blood relatives who saw us as nothing more than an inheritance to collect. That's the final message, the one worth remembering when your own phone inevitably buzzes with impossible news. The truth might destroy everything you thought you knew, but from that destruction can come something better, something real, something worth the pain of discovery. Don't trust the children, the message said. It was right. But more importantly, trust the truth, no matter where it leads, no matter who it exposes, no matter how much it hurts. Because in the end, truth is all that remains when the performance ends, when the masks fall, when the coffin is opened to reveal who's really inside. And sometimes, just sometimes, the most terrible truth is also the beginning of the most unexpected salvation.